Hello and welcome to another calming curiosity voyage with sleep theory. If you found your way here tonight, chances are you're looking to unwind, let go of the day, and maybe learn something fascinating along the way. You're in the right place. This evening, we're sinking gently into the humming engine of your inner world, emotions. Those invisible tides that lift us up, push us sideways, and sometimes leave us unexpectedly teary at a sunset or at a song from years ago. Together, we'll explore not just why we feel, but how. The biological and neurological ballet that turns everyday experience into the vivid language of feeling. Now, I should warn you, this story may be just interesting enough to keep you awake. But if you find yourself lying there at 2 a.m. wide-eyed with wonder, remember, you're not just losing sleep, you're gaining knowledge. Not a bad trade-off. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it in your corner of the cosmos? Drop a comment below. It's always amazing to see how far this sleepy little community reaches. So, take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and allow your thoughts to drift as we begin the quiet story of how your brain feels emotions.
Imagine a world without emotions. No fear, no joy, no heartbreaks over sad songs or butterflies before a first date. Just data processing. Like a computer politely answering emails but never feeling a thing. Thankfully, that's not how our brains work. Instead, we're equipped with a rich and ancient system that helps us feel our way through life. Emotions aren't just fleeting moods or dramatic outbursts, they're biological signals, honed over millions of years, that helped our ancestors survive and connect. In fact, emotions might just be one of evolution's cleverest inventions. Long before humans had language or civilization, or even a solid pair of shoes, we had feelings. Early animals needed a way to react quickly to danger, seek out rewards, bond with others, and avoid repeating bad experiences. Emotion stepped in as the original behavioral compass. When a creature felt fear, it fled. When it felt pleasure, it repeated whatever caused it. No need for philosophical reflection, just action. These basic emotional reactions gave species a survival edge, and over time those emotional systems became more nuanced, especially in social animals like us. At the heart of this emotional evolution is the brain, specifically a group of structures often called the limbic system. Nestled deep within your skull, the limbic system is like a backstage crew, quietly managing the show while the spotlight shines on your conscious thoughts. And while the brain is often romanticized as the seat of logic and reason, it turns out we owe much of our daily behavior to this more primitive emotional machinery. One of the star performers in this emotional ensemble is the amygdala. This almond-shaped cluster of neurons has been around for a long, long time, over 500 million years in some form. In early life forms, it evolved to scan for threats. Is that rustle in the bushes a breeze, or dinner, or worse, something that thinks you're dinner? The amygdala doesn't wait around to ponder the options. It springs into action, activating fear responses that increase your chances of making a fast getaway. It's the part of your brain that lights up when you hear a sudden loud noise or spot a spider crawling a little too close for comfort. But emotion isn't just about survival, it's also about connection. Many animals evolved to live in groups, and emotions became crucial social tools. A dog lowering its ears, a chimpanzee grooming its friend, a human baby crying. All these are emotional expressions that signal needs and intentions. Emotions helped mammals bond, cooperate, and raise their young, increasing the odds that those young would survive. In a way, emotions are evolution's version of social glue. Over time, as brains grew more complex, so did the emotional repertoire. A lizard might feel fear and aggression, a dog can feel joy and shame, or something suspiciously like it. But humans, we've developed an entire emotional kaleidoscope: envy, awe, nostalgia, embarrassment, longing, contentment, even that oddly specific anxiety you feel after sending a risky text. Our prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain that handles decision-making and self-awareness, helps layer emotions with meaning, memory, and culture. That's why a simple melody can move you to tears, or why a scent can transport you back to your grandmother's kitchen in an instant. Of course, we're not the only creatures with emotional lives. Elephants have been observed mourning their dead. Dolphins seem to play and even tease one another. Rats will press levers to save their trapped companions. These behaviours suggest that complex feelings aren't exclusive to humans. They are part of a broader evolutionary strategy among intelligent social animals. The more emotionally sophisticated a species, the better it can navigate its group dynamics. In evolutionary terms, feelings are a feature, not a bug. Still, our human emotions are wrapped up in layers of language, culture, and reflection. We write songs about heartbreak, build rituals around grief, and experience joy in watching strangers win cooking competitions. This added complexity can be both a gift and a challenge. While basic emotions like fear and pleasure are relatively universal, many emotional experiences are shaped by our upbringing, beliefs, and even the stories we tell ourselves. But beneath it all, beneath the drama and poetry and social etiquette, is a biological truth. Emotions begin in the body. They are physiological events. When you feel something, it's not just in your mind. Your heart rate changes, your muscles tense, your pupils dilate, hormones are released. Emotions aren't vague ideas floating through your brain. They're embodied experiences anchored in real physical reactions. Think of it like this. Emotions are your brain's way of sending urgent memos to the rest of your body. Hey, something important is happening. Whether it's danger, opportunity, or connection, the brain responds with a coordinated reaction designed to prepare you. And though we live in a world where most of us aren't running from lions, those ancient systems are still active. That's why a work email marked urgent can make your chest tighten. Your brain is using the same circuitry it developed when urgent meant saber-toothed cat. It's worth noting that while the emotional brain is ancient, it's not clumsy. It's incredibly fast and often incredibly accurate, detecting subtle facial cues, remembering emotional events vividly, and adjusting your behavior based on past experiences. But it does have a downside. Because it prioritizes speed over nuance, the emotional system can sometimes misfire. Think of panic attacks, irrational fears, or disproportionate anger. These are signs that your brain's threat detection system is being a bit too helpful, like an over-enthusiastic security guard seeing danger everywhere. Luckily, humans also evolved the ability to reflect on emotions, to name them, share them, and in many cases, regulate them. That's a uniquely human strength, the ability to feel something, recognize it, and decide how to respond. But even this starts with the basics, with the ancient emotional machinery that kept our ancestors alive long enough to invent poetry and playlists. So next time you feel something, a pang of anxiety, a swell of joy, a quiet sense of calm, remember that you're participating in one of evolution's most powerful inventions. You're not just reacting randomly. You're carrying forward a system built over hundreds of millions of years, tested in wild forests and ancient tribes, and still adapting to modern life with its alarms, emojis, and existential dread. And in case you were wondering, yes, even the feeling of wondering is emotional. It's curiosity, which, delightfully, is also one of the things that makes us most human. Let's venture a little deeper now, into the folds and grooves of your brain, where the real emotional magic happens. Tucked inside that 3-pound jelly-textured marvel are the very structures responsible for the ups and downs of your emotional life. They're not big or flashy, but together they orchestrate the full range of human feeling, from the sudden zing of panic when you miss a step to the gentle warmth of nostalgia when a certain song plays. Welcome to the Emotional Command Center. It's time to meet the crew. Let's start with the amygdala, the brain's emotional smoke detector. You have 2 of them, one in each hemisphere of your brain. They're about the size and shape of almonds. But don't let their size fool you. These little guys pack a punch. When something emotionally significant happens, especially something that feels threatening, the amygdala is often the first to respond. It's scanning your environment constantly, asking questions like, is that dangerous? Should we be worried? Do I know that face? When it senses something important, it doesn't wait politely for the rest of the brain to weigh in. It hits the alarm. Signals shoot out, your body gears up, and before you know it, your heart rate increases, your breathing changes, and your muscles tense, all before you're fully aware of what's going on. That's why sometimes you jump before you realize what startled you. Your amygdala had already started the party, and your conscious brain is just catching up. Next up, the hippocampus, your memory librarian. While the amygdala is busy deciding what's emotionally important, the hippocampus is quietly shelving everything into long-term storage. But these two brain regions are close collaborators. Emotion and memory are deeply linked. That's why emotionally intense events are often the most memorable. You might forget what you had for lunch 3 days ago, but you probably remember where you were during a major emotional event in your life. Interestingly, the hippocampus doesn't just record events, it helps put them in context. It figures out where things happened, when, and what was going on. So when you smell freshly cut grass and suddenly feel 7 years old again, that's your hippocampus connecting the dots between sensory input and emotional memory. Then we have the hypothalamus, the brain's multitasking maestro. While it's not exclusively emotional, it plays a vital role in managing your body's response to emotion. When the amygdala sends out a distress signal, say, you nearly step on a Lego in the dark, the hypothalamus takes over the physical response. It tells your adrenal glands to release adrenaline and cortisol. It boosts your heart rate, dilates your pupils, and gets your body ready for fight or flight. It's a bit like a general calling troops to attention the moment a threat is spotted. Yet the hypothalamus also gets involved in positive emotions, love, bonding, trust. These two are rooted in its realm. It helps regulate the release of oxytocin, often called the love hormone, which deepens emotional connections and plays a big role in parenting, relationships, and even casual affection. Just hugging someone or petting a dog? Yeah, your hypothalamus is quietly stirring the emotional soup. But let's not forget the brain's refined front row manager, the prefrontal cortex. This is the rational, analytical part of your brain, and it's responsible for some very advanced emotional maneuvering. It's where emotional regulation happens, where you calm yourself down, reframe a situation, or talk yourself out of texting your ex. The prefrontal cortex is what allows you to feel an emotion and then think about it. You can analyze your anger instead of punching a wall. You can feel jealousy and decide not to act on it. It helps you weigh long-term consequences, show empathy, and imagine how others feel. It's like having an inner therapist, life coach, and ethics professor all rolled into one. Interestingly, there's often a bit of a tug-of-war between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The amygdala shouts, "Panic," and the prefrontal cortex gently replies, "Let's think this through." In healthy brains, there's a balance between the two. In moments of stress, the prefrontal cortex can step in and de-escalate the emotional surge. But in moments of intense fear or trauma, the amygdala can hijack the system, essentially overwhelming rational thought in favor of raw emotion. This is sometimes called an amygdala hijack, and it explains why people sometimes act out in ways they later regret. The brain was in survival mode, not decision-making mode. There's another fascinating player in this emotional cast, the insula. It doesn't get the same press as the amygdala or prefrontal cortex, but it's crucial for interoception, your brain's ability to sense what's happening inside your body. Ever felt butterflies in your stomach, a racing heart, or a lump in your throat? The insula is part of the system that registers those internal sensations and ties them to your emotional state. It's the bridge between physical feeling and emotional awareness. In many ways, the insula is why emotions feel felt. It transforms physiological changes, sweaty palms, fluttery guts, into conscious experience. It's one thing for your heart rate to rise, it's another to feel nervous because of it. That's the insula quietly making your inner world visible to your conscious mind. We also need to talk about the anterior cingulate cortex, a mouthful of a name for a brain region involved in empathy, error detection, and social evaluation. It's the part of your brain that lights up when you see someone else in pain, emotional or physical, and feel a version of it yourself. It's also involved in regulating emotions and managing social conflict. Essentially, it helps you navigate the complex emotional terrain of being a human among other humans, which, let's be honest, can sometimes be emotionally messy. What's incredible is how tightly all these regions work together. The emotional brain isn't one neat room with a single function. It's more like a network of interconnected spaces where messages are constantly being relayed, interpreted, modified, and returned. It's dynamic, adaptable, and deeply influenced by your past experiences, current state, and even your expectations. And while this system is generally efficient, it's not flawless. Emotional misfires happen. Sometimes your amygdala reacts too strongly. Sometimes your prefrontal cortex is too tired to manage a flood of feelings. Sometimes your hippocampus over-associates a past trauma with a present moment. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a system doing its best under complex conditions. In fact, part of emotional intelligence is learning how to listen to these signals, how to recognize when your brain is reacting based on old fears or assumptions, and how to bring your rational self gently into the conversation. It's a bit like being both the rider and the horse, balancing instinct and control, so the next time you feel overwhelmed, euphoric, anxious, or just a little off, remember, it's not just you being dramatic. It's your amygdala, hypothalamus, insula, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex all talking to each other, trying to help you understand your world and respond to it. You're not broken. You're beautifully complex, and somehow, despite the chaos, it all works. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel love and know it's more than just chemicals. You can cry at a movie you've seen 5 times and still be surprised by how real it feels. That's your emotional brain. Primitive and poetic, ancient and astonishing, quietly working while you live, laugh, cry, and occasionally eat ice cream for dinner, which, by the way, your emotional brain fully supports. Picture this. You're walking through a quiet park, birds chirping, a breeze brushing your face. Suddenly a dog barks loudly behind you, your heart leaps, your shoulders tense, and for a split second, you're convinced something terrible is about to happen. Then, nothing. Just a fluffy Labrador chasing a tennis ball. You exhale, laugh at yourself a little, and keep walking. But what just happened in your brain? Welcome to the emotional chain reaction, how something as simple as a bark becomes a full-body, heart-racing experience. Emotions may feel like clouds floating through your mind, but they're actually grounded in complex sequences of biological events. Like dominoes falling, one signal triggers another, weaving a momentary thread of experience that we come to recognize as a feeling. Let's walk through the steps of how emotions arise, starting with the spark. A stimulus. This could be anything, an image, a sound, a memory, a thought. Maybe it's a text message from someone you weren't expecting. Maybe it's a smell that reminds you of a person you miss. Whatever it is, the brain takes it in through the senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, and starts processing. And it does this fast. We're talking milliseconds. The first stop is your brain's sensory relay station, the thalamus. Think of the thalamus like a roundabout in a busy city. All sensory traffic comes here first, and it decides where everything should go. If the input is emotionally charged, or potentially threatening, it quickly diverts it to the amygdala. That's the emotional shortcut. Your brain doesn't wait for full comprehension to decide if something might be dangerous. If it looks, sounds, or smells even vaguely alarming, the thalamus sends an express package to the amygdala just in case. This is why you can react before you know exactly what you're reacting to. It's a protective measure. The amygdala gets that rapid input, makes a snap judgment, and, if it deems the situation worthy of alarm, hits the big red button, activate, fight, flight, or freeze. Meanwhile, the same information also takes a slower, more scenic route to the sensory cortex, the part of the brain that handles detailed analysis. This is where you figure out, oh, that bark wasn't a bear, it was a dog. This route takes slightly longer, but it's more accurate. That's why you may jump at the sound, then calm down a second later. Your emotional brain reacts first. Your thinking brain follows with the clarification. Now, once the amygdala has been triggered, it doesn't stop with just raising awareness. It activates the hypothalamus, which, as we saw earlier, is your brain's command center for physical response. This kicks off a cascade of hormonal releases via the autonomic nervous system, specifically the sympathetic branch, which revs up your body to prepare for action. Your adrenal glands release adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart starts pumping faster to deliver more oxygen. Your muscles tense. Your pupils dilate to take in more information. Even your digestion slows down, because who needs to process lunch when your brain thinks you're about to wrestle a wolf? All of these physiological changes happen fast and without your permission. They're automatic, built-in, and mostly out of your conscious control. That's what makes emotions feel so intense. Your entire body gets involved. You don't just think you're scared, you feel it, from your racing heart to your sweaty palms. This whole body experience is what makes emotions so powerful and sometimes so overwhelming. And it's not just fear that follows this chain reaction. Take joy, for example. Let's say you get an unexpected compliment. Your brain registers it, processes it through language centers, and your reward system kicks in. Specifically, your ventral tegmental area, VTA, and nucleus accumbens light up. areas associated with pleasure and reward. They release dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter, and suddenly you feel a little glow. Your shoulders relax, maybe you smile, maybe your heart does a little happy flutter. All of that came from just a few kind words. Incredible, right? But it's not always external triggers that start the chain. Sometimes it's internal, a thought, a memory, an expectation. The brain isn't just a passive recipient of the world. It's constantly simulating possibilities, revisiting the past, imagining the future. A single thought, like, what if I embarrass myself, can set off the same emotional cascade as an actual embarrassing moment. Your body doesn't always know the difference between imagination and reality. If the brain believes a situation is emotionally charged, the body reacts accordingly. This is especially true for anxiety, where imagined scenarios, often worst-case ones, provoke real physiological responses. The brain paints a vivid picture, and the emotional system obliges with sweaty palms and a tight chest, even though nothing is happening right now. This is part of why managing thoughts can help manage emotions, because those thoughts are stimuli in the emotional loop. Now here's where things get even more fascinating. Once the emotion is in full swing, another part of the brain kicks in to interpret and label it. This is often referred to as emotional appraisal. The prefrontal cortex evaluates the situation. Am I scared because there's real danger, or because I'm remembering something from the past? It compares current input with past experiences stored in the hippocampus, allowing you to put things into context. This interpretation stage is crucial. Two people might have the exact same physical response, elevated heart rate, fluttery stomach, but label it completely differently. One might say, I'm excited, while the other says, I'm anxious. The body doesn't always distinguish between emotional states. The meaning you assign to those signals, that's what shapes your experience of the emotion. Here's an odd but insightful experiment. Researchers have asked participants to reframe anxiety as excitement. Just by labeling the sensation differently, people performed better in stressful tasks like public speaking. The body's arousal was the same, but the emotional story changed. Your brain listens to the words you use to describe your feelings. Say it's fear when it will act like fear. Say it's excitement, and the brain might shift into anticipation instead. Once the emotion has been processed, labeled, and felt, the brain begins to wind it down. The parasympathetic nervous system, the body's calming division, steps in. It slows the heart, returns breathing to normal, and tells the digestive system it's safe to resume its duties. You return to baseline. This balance between activation and recovery is essential. A healthy emotional system is not one that never gets upset, but one that knows how to return to calm. That's why practices like deep breathing, mindfulness, and meditation can be so powerful. They don't erase emotions, but they activate the parasympathetic system and help your brain step off the emotional roller coaster. Essentially, they're a gentle reminder to your body that it's okay to relax, that the bark was just a dog, not a bear. One last piece of the puzzle. Emotions don't just influence your body and thoughts, they also shape your behavior. Fear might make you withdraw. Joy might lead you to connect. Sadness may slow you down, encouraging reflection. These behavioral tendencies are part of the emotional chain. They are how your brain translates feelings into action. And these actions in turn create new stimuli. You hug someone and feel comforted. You lash out and feel regret. The emotional chain doesn't end with a feeling. It loops. It feeds into your future responses, shaping who you are and how you relate to the world. Over time, patterns form. We call them emotional habits, tendencies, even personality traits. But at their core, they're all built from these same building blocks. Perception, reaction, interpretation, even regulation. Emotions are not random or chaotic. They are exquisitely coordinated processes, honed by evolution and refined by experience. They are your brain's way of helping you survive, connect, decide, and remember. And the next time you feel something, anything, just know there's a whole orchestra of brain structures, chemicals, and circuits playing in perfect, if occasionally dramatic harmony to bring that feeling to life. Let's talk chemistry, but don't worry, there won't be a quiz at the end. The only beaker involved here is the one in your head, gently bubbling with neurotransmitters and hormones every time you feel something. Emotions, for all their poetry and mystery, are deeply chemical. Your moods, reactions, even the inexplicable urge to cry during certain commercials, these all have molecular fingerprints. To really understand how the brain feels emotions, we need to meet the cast of chemical messengers working behind the scenes. These are the molecules that turn neural signals into sensations, thoughts into feelings, and small triggers into full-blown emotional experiences. Some of them soothe, some excite, and some do a bit of both depending on where they go and how much is released. So grab a metaphorical lab coat. We're about to meet the molecular MVPs of your emotional brain. First up, the most famous and misunderstood dopamine. Dopamine is often referred to as the pleasure chemical, but that's a bit of an oversimplification. It's less about pleasure itself and more about anticipation. When you see something you want, whether it's a slice of cake, a text from someone you like, or the next episode of your favorite show, dopamine levels rise. It motivates you to pursue rewards. It says, "Hey, that thing looks nice, go get it." The brain's mesolimbic pathway, sometimes called the reward pathway, is central to dopamine's effects. When dopamine flows along this circuit, it reinforces behavior by making it feel good. That's why habits form. If you do something and it results in a dopamine hit, your brain remembers and encourages you to do it again. But dopamine isn't just about indulgence. It plays a role in learning, attention, and goal-directed behavior. Too little dopamine and motivation drops. You may feel flat, indifferent, or sluggish. Too much, and things can tip into impulsivity, risk-taking, or even addiction. Dopamine is a master of momentum. It drives you forward, and it feels good when you're getting somewhere. Next, let's talk about serotonin, the brain's mood stabilizer. Serotonin is a bit quieter than dopamine. It's not about chase and reward, but rather about overall contentment. When serotonin levels are balanced, you're more likely to feel calm, stable, and emotionally steady. When they're low, things can get wobbly. You might feel anxious, irritable, or depressed. Most of the body's serotonin, about 90%, is actually produced in the gut. Yes, your intestines are something of a second brain. The gut and brain are in constant communication via the gut-brain axis, which is why emotional states can affect digestion, hello nervous stomach, and why poor gut health might impact mood. It's also why a warm bowl of soup or a well-timed snack can be surprisingly comforting. Serotonin helps regulate sleep, appetite, mood, and memory. It's the reason why exposure to sunlight can improve your mood, light boosts serotonin production, and why some antidepressants work by increasing serotonin levels in the brain. Think of serotonin as emotional scaffolding. It doesn't create strong highs, but it helps prevent you from sinking too low. Then we have oxytocin, the so-called love hormone. It's released during hugs, touch, eye contact, and moments of trust. It's especially active during childbirth and breastfeeding, promoting bonding between mother and baby. But oxytocin doesn't stop there. It also flows when you pet your dog, hold hands with a friend, or feel deeply connected during conversation. Oxytocin is nature's way of saying, hey, you're safe, you belong, some more. It fosters closeness and cooperation. And interestingly, it works both ways. It's released in the person giving affection and the one receiving it. This mutual feedback loop helps reinforce social bonds and trust. Of course, oxytocin isn't always hearts and rainbows. It can also enhance in-group loyalty and out-group suspicion. In other words, it helps people bond, but sometimes only with the people they consider part of their group. Like many things in the brain, oxytocin is powerful, but context matters. Now let's add a little spice to the mix with adrenaline and cortisol, the dynamic duo of stress. Adrenaline, also called epinephrine, is your body's emergency broadcast system. When something suddenly threatens your safety, adrenaline floods your system. Heart rate spikes, airways open, energy surges. This is the famous fight or flight response. Your body gears up to either defend itself or run like the wind. Adrenaline is fast, released by the adrenal glands within seconds of a stressor. It sharpens your senses and boosts physical performance. Great for escaping predators or for narrowly avoiding a rogue shopping cart in a supermarket parking lot. Cortisol, on the other hand, is slower acting but longer lasting. It's released in response to ongoing stress and helps mobilize energy by increasing blood sugar and suppressing non-essential functions like digestion and reproduction. Cortisol helps you push through challenges, stay alert, and remain on edge when the situation demands it. But here's the catch. While adrenaline and cortisol are life-saving in a crisis, they are not meant to be switched on all the time. Chronic stress, commuting, work emails, general existential dread can lead to persistently high cortisol levels, which are linked to anxiety, insomnia, weight gain, and weakened immunity. Your brain evolved to handle saber-toothed tigers, not non-stop notifications. That's why relaxation, sleep, and social connection are essential, not optional, for emotional balance. They allow your body to shift back into parasympathetic mode, where healing, digestion, and calm can resume. Another interesting player is endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. They're released during exercise, laughter, and even spicy food consumption. Endorphins bind to the brain's opioid receptors, reducing pain and creating a mild euphoria. They are part of the reason why a good workout, a belly laugh, or a long cry can leave you feeling better afterwards. Then there's GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is like the emotional brake pedal. It calms the nervous system, reduces overactivity, and helps with relaxation. Medications for anxiety, like benzodiazepines, work by increasing GABA activity in the brain. Naturally boosting GABA, through deep breathing, yoga, or soothing music, can help quiet racing thoughts and promote a sense of ease. And finally, we have glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. It's essential for learning and memory, but can become problematic when levels are too high. In cases of trauma or chronic stress, excess glutamate can lead to excitotoxicity, essentially overstimulating and damaging neurons. Balance, as always, is key. Each of these chemicals has its own distinct role, but emotions rarely rely on just one. They are the result of complex combinations, with different regions of the brain responding in unique ways depending on the situation, your personal history, and even your genetic makeup. One person's joy might involve a huge burst of dopamine, and others might lean more on oxytocin. The emotional experience is universal, but the recipe is personal. And while we can't fully control these chemical messengers, we can influence them. Sleep, diet, exercise, sunlight, connection, all of these affect your brain chemistry. Even small things like listening to music or spending time in nature can shift the emotional tone of your day. You don't need to micromanage your molecules, but knowing they're there can be reassuring. Your feelings aren't random. They're the echo of a beautifully choreographed internal dance. So the next time you find yourself overwhelmed with joy, frustration, or anything in between, remember, you're not being irrational. You're being thoroughly chemically human. Your brain is running its recipe, blending just the right or sometimes slightly chaotic mix of neurotransmitters and hormones to help you experience the world. It's messy, it's beautiful, and it's all happening in the tiniest of spaces, millions of times a day, so you can laugh, cry, hope, ache, and love, all because of chemistry. Fear gets a bad rap. It's often portrayed as the enemy, something to be conquered, pushed down, or ignored. But in reality, fear is one of your brain's most ancient and loyal allies. It's been keeping you alive for millions of years, sounding the internal alarm whenever something even vaguely threatening approaches. And while modern life has fewer tigers and more traffic jams, the fear system in your brain is still ticking along, ready to help you react, protect, and sometimes dramatically leap away from a shadow that turned out to be your own coat on a chair. Let's take a closer look at how fear works, what triggers it, what it feels like, and how your brain decides when it's time to go full meerkat mode. The moment you perceive something as a threat, your brain springs into action, fast. The process begins with the thalamus, that central relay station we met earlier, which processes incoming sensory information. It quickly passes the data to the amygdala, which, in the case of fear, acts like a high-strung security guard. The amygdala doesn't wait for full information, it responds to patterns. A sudden movement, a loud bang, an unfamiliar face in a dark alley. These are red flags, and the amygdala is not in the business of subtlety. Once it's been triggered, the amygdala does two things simultaneously. It notifies the hypothalamus, which kicks off the classic fight or flight response, and it starts flagging other areas of the brain that danger might be afoot. The hypothalamus sends signals through the sympathetic nervous system, and your adrenal glands release a rush of adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, blood is redirected to your muscles, your pupils dilate, and your body becomes a finely tuned escape machine. All this happens in milliseconds. You feel your body shifting before you consciously register what's going on. Your brain is prioritizing speed over accuracy, because in evolutionary terms, it's better to jump at a harmless sound than hesitate when real danger is near. This response is universal. It's hardwired. From the tiniest field mouse to a fully grown human adult, fear works in much the same way. And it's incredibly useful. Fear protects us. It's the reason we avoid heights, snakes, deep water, and oncoming traffic. It keeps us cautious around hot stoves, wary in unfamiliar places, and slightly suspicious of emails with subject lines like, "Urgent, verify your bank details." But fear isn't just physical, it's deeply emotional and sometimes even existential. Humans have developed an expanded fear repertoire that goes far beyond immediate threats. We can fear rejection, failure, loneliness, embarrassment, change, the future, and even success. Unlike a rabbit that flees when it hears rustling, we humans can fear ideas, and we can fear things that haven't even happened yet. That's because of the prefrontal cortex, the brain's more contemplative region. It allows us to imagine, project, and analyze future scenarios. In one sense, it's incredibly useful. We can plan, prepare, avoid danger, and learn from past mistakes. But it also means we can get caught in loops of worry. What if this goes wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I trip on stage, forget my words, and fall into a large decorative plaint? This is where anxiety begins to diverge from fear. Fear is usually a response to a clear, immediate threat. There's a spider in your bed. Anxiety is the anticipation of a threat that's less clear, or not happening right now. What if there's a spider next time you pull back the covers? In both cases, the amygdala is active. But in anxiety, the prefrontal cortex plays a bigger role, imagining scenarios and feeding them back into the emotional system. And your brain, in its infinite eagerness to protect you, takes those imagined threats very seriously. It doesn't always distinguish between what's happening and what might happen. So even though you're just lying in bed, your body might respond as though danger is already here. Racing heart, tight chest, tense muscles. It's not just in your head. It's in your brain, your body, your chemistry, completely real. But here's the good news. Because fear is a biological system, it's also one we can learn to understand and even gently rewire. The hippocampus, the brain's memory center, plays a big role in how we learn fear and how we unlearn it. When a frightening event happens, the hippocampus records the details, what happened, where, and when. This helps us avoid repeating dangerous situations, but it can also overgeneralize. If you were once embarrassed during a presentation, your brain might associate all public speaking with humiliation, even if the original event was minor. This is why exposure therapy, a technique used to treat phobias and anxiety, can be so effective. By gradually and safely reintroducing someone to the feared situation, the brain learns that the situation isn't inherently dangerous. The amygdala becomes less reactive, the hippocampus updates its files, and the prefrontal cortex gets more confident at saying, "Hey, we've been here before, it's okay." Of course, not all fears are so easily soothed. Trauma, especially when experienced early or intensely, can leave lasting imprints on the brain. The amygdala may become hyperactive, the hippocampus may struggle to properly contextualize the memory, and the prefrontal cortex might find it harder to regulate the emotional response. This is why traumatic memories can feel so vivid even years later. They bypass the rational brain and go straight to the emotional core. Still, even in these cases, the brain retains its remarkable ability to adapt. Through therapy, support, mindfulness, and safe environments, the fear response can be reshaped. The brain is plastic, meaning it can change. It can learn to differentiate between then and now, between real threat and remembered fear. It takes time and often help, but it's possible. Fear isn't just a private experience either. It's deeply social. We're wired to pick up on others' fear. If someone next to you suddenly gasps or tenses up, your own amygdala becomes alert, even if you don't know what's wrong. This emotional contagion is part of our survival toolkit. If the herd bolts, it's safest to run first and ask questions later. This sensitivity to others' fears is especially strong in children, who often learn what's dangerous by watching how adults react. If a parent screams at the sight of a spider, the child's brain takes note. Spider equals terror. That lesson can stick. Even if the child never personally had a bad spider encounter, our fear responses are shaped not just by experience, but by observation, culture, and storytelling. Interestingly, fear isn't always unpleasant. Some people actively seek it out: roller coasters, horror films, haunted houses. Why? Because in the right context, fear becomes thrilling. You get the adrenaline rush, the heightened senses, the burst of energy, but without real danger. Your prefrontal cortex is still online, reminding you that you're safe, that this is just a simulation. It's a carefully controlled emotional fireworks show, and for many it's exhilarating. That's fear at its most fascinating, a deeply physical, deeply human response that can both protect and excite us. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also functional, informative, and, when understood, surprisingly wise. Your fear is trying to tell you something. Maybe that you need to take caution, maybe that you're stepping out of your comfort zone, maybe that something matters to you. So next time your heart races and your breath quickens, pause before trying to push the feeling away. Thank your amygdala, it's doing its job. Then let your prefrontal cortex weigh in. Is the danger real? Is it imagined? Is it something you can face, learn from, maybe even grow through? Fear isn't weakness, it's a signal. A call for awareness, protection, sometimes courage. And while it may come with shadows and jitters, it also comes with strength. The kind that helped our ancestors survive, helped you learn, and helps us still to rise to the occasion, one heartbeat at a time. Let's shift gears. We've spent time with fear, the loud, flashing siren of the emotional world. Now, let's wander into the golden light of something much softer, joy. That warm rush when you hear your favourite song, the sudden lift in your chest when someone smiles at you unexpectedly, or the inexplicable delight of perfectly crispy toast on a lazy Sunday morning. Joy doesn't need a grand entrance. It tiptoes in, lights up the room, and sometimes slips away before you've had the chance to say thanks. But where does joy come from? How does the brain feel happiness, laughter, or love? And why are these feelings so hard to hold on to, even though we chase them so much of the time? Let's begin, as always, with the brain itself. While fear may be dominated by the amygdala and fight or flight responses, joy draws on a more collaborative circuit of brain regions, particularly those involved in reward, connection, and emotional regulation. Chief among them is the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, a name that sounds complicated but is essentially your brain's pleasure highway. When you experience something rewarding, a delicious meal, a compliment, a hug from someone you care about, dopamine is released. But here's the twist. Dopamine doesn't just flood your system when the good thing happens. It actually spikes in anticipation of the reward. That's why looking forward to vacation can feel almost as good as the vacation itself, or why the moment just before you open a gift feels especially sparkly. Your brain is wired to enjoy wanting as much as it enjoys having. That reward circuit is centered around the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and the nucleus accumbens. These regions process pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. When they're activated, you feel energized, uplifted, and inclined to repeat whatever just made you feel that way. And this is no accident. Evolution made rewards feel good so we'd keep doing things that promote survival. Eating, bonding, socializing, caring for others. But joy isn't just about personal gratification, it's also about connection. That's where oxytocin comes in again. This hormone, released during moments of touch, eye contact, or emotional closeness, helps create feelings of trust and intimacy. It binds people together, not just romantically, but in friendships, families, even fleeting social exchanges. That warm feeling when someone remembers your name, or when you laugh until your sides hurt with a friend, that's oxytocin at work, gently reminding you that you belong. Another ingredient in joy's neurochemical cocktail is serotonin. It often shows up in moments of contentment or well-being, the soft glow of satisfaction rather than the thrill of excitement. Unlike dopamine, which is goal-oriented and active, serotonin is more about feeling balanced and emotionally secure. When serotonin levels are healthy, joy becomes easier to access. When they're low, even pleasant things might not spark much emotion. Then there's endorphins, the body's natural painkillers and mood boosters. These chemicals are released during exercise, laughter, music, dancing, even eating chocolate. Ever heard of a runner's high? That's endorphins helping you float past your limits with a euphoric afterglow. And laughter? That's basically the brain's emotional stretching exercise. It releases tension, improves circulation, and floods the system with feel-good chemicals. No wonder it feels so restorative. Let's not forget the prefrontal cortex, especially its left hemisphere, which research has shown is more active during positive emotional states. This part of the brain helps you reflect on joyful experiences, remember them fondly, and even seek them out again. It adds context and narrative, turning a fleeting moment into a meaningful memory. But if joy is so biologically rewarding, why doesn't it last longer? Why do happy moments fade while stressful ones seem to stick? That's partly due to what psychologists call the negativity bias. From an evolutionary standpoint, remembering bad experiences was more useful for survival than remembering good ones. The brain evolved to prioritize threats, to learn from them and avoid them in the future. So while joy feels amazing, fear and pain tend to leave a deeper mark. You might clearly recall the one criticism you received, even if it was buried among 10 compliments. This doesn't mean the brain is working against joy. It just means we have to be more intentional about holding on to it. That's where practices like gratitude, mindfulness, and savoring come in. These aren't just trendy wellness buzzwords. They're backed by science. When you pause to notice and appreciate something joyful, your brain strengthens the neural connections associated with that feeling. You're teaching your brain, hey, this matters, remember this. Even something as simple as writing down 3 good things that happened during the day has been shown to improve mood over time. That's because your brain is learning to scan for joy, not just danger. Joy also tends to be contagious. Mirror neurons in your brain activate when you see someone else smile or laugh. That's why comedy shows add laugh tracks, or why seeing someone else tear up can make you emotional too. The brain is a deeply social organ. It feels with others, reflects their emotions, and draws strength from shared joy. But let's talk about love. Arguably the most powerful form of joy. Love is not just one emotion, but a blend. Attachment, empathy, comfort, anticipation, even a little fear of loss. It activates reward circuits and oxytocin networks, but also taps into the deeper, more reflective parts of the brain. Love makes you feel safe and alive. It's one of the most enduring sources of joy because it ties together the personal and the social, the me and the we. Romantic love, parental love, platonic love. They each have their own emotional signature, but they all rely on the brain's ability to bond, trust, and see value in others. And while love can certainly be complicated, at its core it's one of the most profound joys we're capable of feeling. Of course, like all emotions, joy is dynamic. It comes and goes. You can't hold on to it forever, and trying to do so often backfires. Ever tried to enjoy something too much and ended up ruining it? That's the prefrontal cortex trying a little too hard to wrangle the experience. Sometimes the best joy is the one that sneaks up on you, unplanned, unforced, like sunlight slipping through a window when you weren't looking for it. So how can we invite more joy into our lives without chasing it away? We can start by noticing small things, the way your favorite mug warms your hands, the sound of rain tapping on the window, a funny memory that bubbles up for no reason. These micro joys are all around, waiting for our attention. We can also connect with people, animals, music, nature. Joy thrives in relationships, not just with others, but with the world itself. And finally, we can let joy be enough, even if it's brief, even if it's simple. You don't need a perfect day to feel good. Sometimes a good cup of tea and a few deep breaths will do the trick. In a world that often emphasizes striving, achieving, and fixing, joy reminds us of something gentler. You don't have to earn your feelings. Your brain is wired to feel joy, to laugh, to love, to light up in moments of connection. It's not a luxury, it's part of being human. So the next time you feel that little spark, whether it's from a joke, a song, a cuddle, or a quiet moment all to yourself, don't rush past it. Let it linger. Smile back and give your beautiful, complex brain a silent thank you for knowing exactly how to feel it. Sadness doesn't have the razzle-dazzle of joy or the urgent pulse of fear. It doesn't come screaming into the room with fanfare. Instead, it tends to arrive quietly, like a grey sky settling over a familiar landscape. It's the emotion we often try to avoid, brush aside, or apologize for, as if its presence is a personal failure. But sadness is not weakness. It's not an error. In many ways, it's one of our brain's most honest responses to loss, disappointment, or change. And while it might not feel helpful in the moment, sadness has an important role to play. It slows us down. It encourages reflection. It signals to others that we need support. In fact, from the perspective of your brain, sadness is not a problem to fix, but a message to understand. Let's begin by looking at what happens in the brain during sadness. Unlike the fast, reactive circuitry of fear, sadness engages a broader, slower, and more complex network. This includes areas involved in memory, self-awareness, and social understanding. A key player here is the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex. a region that helps regulate emotional responses and is strongly associated with mood. It's often overactive in people experiencing depression and tends to quiet down when mood improves. This region connects with other important parts of the emotional brain. The amygdala, which we know from fear processing, is also involved in sadness, though its role is a bit more contemplative here. It helps detect emotional salience, how important or meaningful something feels. In sadness, it tends to work alongside the hippocampus, linking emotional responses to memory. And that's part of what makes sadness so heavy. It's often rooted in loss, whether real or imagined. It can be the loss of a person, a dream, a relationship, a stage of life. The hippocampus remembers what was. The prefrontal cortex recognizes that it's gone. The amygdala feels the sting of that realization. Together, they create that aching blend of memory, meaning, and yearning. Interestingly, sadness isn't just about what happened. It's also shaped by how we think about what happened. That's where rumination comes in. Rumination is the tendency to mentally replay painful experiences over and over, looking for reasons, alternate outcomes, or deeper meaning. It's a hallmark of sadness and can be both helpful and harmful. In small doses, reflecting on what went wrong can lead to growth and insight. Your brain is trying to learn to make sense of things, but if left unchecked, rumination can become a loop, pulling you deeper into emotional quicksand. The default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions active during self-referential thought, tends to light up during these periods of deep reflection. It's the network involved when you're not focused on the outside world, but instead mulling over your own thoughts, memories, and identity. And yes, this network can be poetic. It's part of why sadness often makes us reflective, artistic, or philosophical. Some of the world's greatest art, music, and literature have sprung from this mental space. But the same network, when overactive, can contribute to emotional stuckness. The key is in how we relate to our sadness. Do we sit with it gently? Or do we wrestle it, judge it, or try to run from it? Let's not forget the physical side of sadness. Like all emotions, sadness is not just a mental state. It's a full-body experience. It's the lump in your throat, the heaviness in your limbs, the tightness in your chest. These sensations come from the brain sending signals through the autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic branch, which slows things down. Heart rate drops, breathing becomes shallow, energy declines. Your body is mirroring your emotional need for withdrawal and rest. This physiological slowing may have had evolutionary value. In times of emotional pain or social loss, slowing down might have signaled to the group that something was wrong, inviting comfort and care from others. Humans are deeply social creatures, and sadness has always had a communicative function. A bowed head, a quiet voice, tears, these are subtle signals that can draw others closer if we let them. Speaking of tears, let's take a moment to appreciate them. Humans are the only species that cry emotional tears. Yes, other animals shed tears for lubrication or irritation, but only humans weep for emotional reasons. These tears are chemically different from reflex tears. They contain stress hormones and natural painkillers like lutein and enkephalin. Some researchers believe crying helps regulate emotion and even signals vulnerability in a way that strengthens social bonds. So crying doesn't mean you're falling apart, it means your brain and body are working together to process something meaningful. Think of it as emotional release through plumbing. Sadness, especially when shared, often leads to connection. That might sound strange. How could something that feels isolating lead to closeness? But when we allow others to see our sadness, we open the door for empathy. Mirror neurons, which activate when we observe someone else's emotions, help us feel what others feel. When you see someone else cry, your brain quietly echoes their sorrow. It's a neurological basis for compassion. This empathy doesn't just comfort the person who's sad, it helps the person offering support too. Acts of kindness and emotional care light up reward centers in the brain. They release oxytocin, lower cortisol, and promote a sense of belonging. In a way, sadness is a deeply communal emotion. It reminds us that we're wired to care for one another. Of course, when sadness becomes chronic or begins to interfere with daily life, it might shift into depression, a condition that involves altered activity in several brain regions, including the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, and cingulate cortex. Depression can dull emotions, distort thinking, and sap energy. It's not just being sad for a long time, it's a complex neurological state that deserves care, understanding, and often treatment. But ordinary sadness, the kind that comes and goes, tied to the ebb and flow of life, is natural and necessary. It slows us down when we need rest. It teaches us to appreciate joy by contrast. It fosters empathy. It helps us process loss and recalibrate our priorities. Sadness can also be strangely beautiful. There's a Japanese aesthetic called wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and the quiet melancholy of life. Sadness, in this sense, is not something to be erased. It's something to be honoured. It deepens our experience, softens our edges, and reminds us that we care, that we've loved, that something mattered. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. Sadness exists because we form attachments. To people, to moments, to hopes. It arises when those attachments are challenged or broken. It's not a malfunction, it's a reflection of your humanity. So if you're feeling sad, whether over something small or something life-changing, know this: your brain is not broken. It's doing what it's meant to do. It's remembering, reflecting, feeling. Let it. You don't have to fix it right away. You don't have to explain it or justify it. Just breathe, rest, and let the feeling move through. Like all emotions, sadness is a visitor, not a permanent resident. And when it leaves, it often leaves behind clarity, softness, and space for something new. In the meantime, be gentle with yourself. Your brain is working hard, processing, integrating, healing. Even in sadness, you are growing. Even in sorrow, your emotional system is whispering. You're alive, you're human, and you are not alone. Anger is one of the most misunderstood emotions out there. It's often treated like an unruly guest. Loud, unpleasant, best kept outside. But anger, like all emotions, has a purpose. It's not just a sudden burst of irritation when someone cuts you off in traffic or leaves dishes in the sink for the third day in a row. Beneath the heat and sharp edges, anger is a response to injustice, frustration, or a perceived violation of boundaries. It's your brain's way of saying something's not right and it needs to change. Let's start with what happens in the brain when anger flares. As with other emotional reactions, it begins with a stimulus. Something that your brain evaluates as unfair, threatening, or obstructive. This could be a comment that stings, a goal that's blocked, or a situation that feels deeply wrong. Once that trigger is detected, the brain's ancient alarm system kicks in. Enter the amygdala, our trusty danger detector. While we often associate the amygdala with fear, it's just as active in anger. In fact, anger and fear often emerge from the same basic process, the brain sensing a threat. The difference is in the response. Fear says retreat. Anger says advance. Where fear might make you freeze or flee, anger prepares you to confront, to act, to assert yourself. When the amygdala is activated by a perceived offence, it communicates with the hypothalamus, which then signals the adrenal glands to release adrenaline and noradrenaline. Your heart races, your blood pressure rises, and your muscles tense. You're primed for action. This is the sympathetic nervous system at work, revving you up for a possible confrontation. Your brain is preparing you to fight, not necessarily with fists, but with words, posture, or presence. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning and self-control, is receiving the emotional information. Ideally, it evaluates the situation, applies context, and helps modulate your response. But here's the catch. When emotions run high, the prefrontal cortex can be temporarily hijacked. If the anger is intense enough, rational thought gets shoved into the back seat. This is what we call an amygdala hijack, when your emotional brain takes the wheel and your thinking brain just has to hang on until the storm passes. That's why people sometimes say things in anger they don't mean, or act in ways they later regret. The emotional system is reacting faster than the rational one can keep up. But this doesn't make anger irrational, it just means it's fast. And like all quick reactions, it sometimes needs a moment before it can be understood and integrated. Now, not all anger is explosive. There's the slow burn kind, the quiet seething that brews when someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, or when you feel chronically overlooked or dismissed. This type of anger is often more cognitive, involving prolonged engagement with the prefrontal cortex. You might replay a frustrating conversation over and over in your head, build a case in your mind, or fantasize about saying what you really think. While this can be emotionally exhausting, it's also a sign that your brain is trying to process unresolved conflict or unmet needs. Anger also activates the insula, a brain region involved in processing bodily sensations and internal awareness. That tight feeling in your chest, the heat in your face, the clenching of your jaw, that's the insula translating your body's stress response into conscious experience. You're not just angry, you feel angry. And don't forget the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps detect social errors and regulate emotional conflict. It helps you recognize that something about the situation is unfair or inconsistent. This is especially relevant in moral anger, the kind you feel when you witness injustice, cruelty, or dishonesty. This isn't just a personal slight. It's a broader, values-based reaction that says, this shouldn't be happening. In fact, some of the most important social movements in history have been powered by righteous anger. Civil rights, labor rights, climate justice, all of these are born from a refusal to accept injustice. Anger can be transformational. It alerts us to violations of our values and energizes us to protect what matters. It's not inherently destructive, it's directional, pointing to where something needs to change. Of course, how we handle anger makes all the difference. Unregulated anger, especially when chronic, can lead to health issues like hypertension, anxiety, and poor sleep. It can damage relationships, hinder communication, and isolate us from support. This is especially true when anger becomes reactive aggression, a defensive response where the goal is to harm or control. In these cases, the amygdala is running the show and the prefrontal cortex needs some serious reinforcements. But anger doesn't have to explode to be harmful. It can simmer beneath the surface, showing up as passive aggression, sarcasm, or emotional withdrawal. These expressions are quieter but still corrosive. They reflect a disconnection between feeling and communication, a kind of emotional static that interferes with clarity and connection. So what can we do when anger shows up, red-faced, breathless, and insistent? First, we pause. Just a few deep breaths can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, helping to lower your physiological arousal. This gives the prefrontal cortex time to re-engage, allowing you to assess rather than react. Next, we name it. Studies show that labeling emotions, simply saying "I'm angry," can reduce their intensity. It creates a bit of distance between you and the feeling, giving you more room to maneuver. Then we investigate. What's beneath the anger? Is it hurt, fear, frustration? Often anger is a secondary emotion layered on top of a more vulnerable state. For example, when someone ignores your needs, the underlying feeling might be sadness or rejection. But anger arrives to protect you. Finally, we express it, constructively. This might mean setting a boundary, having an honest conversation, or channeling your energy into writing, movement, or activism. The goal isn't to suppress the anger, but to use it as information. What is this feeling asking of me? What needs to be protected or healed? There's also great value in cultivating self-compassion during angry moments. Anger can bring up shame, especially if you were taught that expressing it is wrong or dangerous. But shame only clouds the emotional signal. If you can meet your anger with curiosity instead of judgment, you begin to understand it. And in understanding, you gain choice. On the flip side, recognizing anger in others is just as important. When someone lashes out, they're not necessarily trying to hurt you. They may be overwhelmed, unheard, or scared. That doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it adds a layer of empathy. Anger, after all, is often a cry for help in disguise. Over time, learning to navigate anger builds what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between emotional states with nuance. Instead of just angry, you might feel irritated, annoyed, resentful, indignant, frustrated, or enraged. Each of these has a slightly different tone, trigger, and message. The more precisely you can identify your feelings, the more skillfully you can respond to them. In the end, anger is not the villain of the emotional world. It's a spotlight, illuminating where something needs attention, whether it's an unmet need, a crossed boundary, or an injustice that can no longer be ignored. It's not about losing control, it's about regaining it with clarity, compassion, and courage. So the next time anger rises up, hot, loud, and undeniable, pause and listen, not just to the feeling, but to the why beneath it. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, it's responding to a challenge, and while the message may arrive with a roar, it's often carrying something worth hearing. Sometimes the loudest emotions have the most important truths hidden in their echoes. memory is a strange and slippery thing. One moment, you can barely recall what you had for lunch yesterday. The next, a single scent or melody yanks you back in time so vividly, it's as if you've stepped into a memory with your whole body. And while we often think of memory as a cognitive process, dates, names, facts neatly filed away, it's also deeply emotional. In fact, some of our most enduring memories are not tied to logic or repetition, but to feeling. Welcome to the emotional archive, your brain's rich, sometimes chaotic vault of experiences stamped with meaning and shaped by emotion. To understand how emotions influence memory, we need to return to two key players in the brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus. These two structures sit near each other in the limbic system and often work as a team. The hippocampus is your memory's librarian. It catalogues information, what happened, where, when. The amygdala, on the other hand, acts like the editor, tagging memories with emotional significance. It asks, was this important, dangerous, joyful, painful? If so, it marks the memory for long-term storage. This is why emotionally charged events tend to be remembered more vividly than emotionally neutral ones. Psychologists call these flashbulb memories, those highly detailed snapshots from emotionally intense moments. Where were you when you heard shocking news? How did you feel when you fell in love? These memories often come with sensory richness. The colour of the sky, the texture of the room, the exact words someone said. The amygdala boosts the encoding of these memories by influencing the release of stress hormones, particularly adrenaline and cortisol. When you're emotionally aroused, these hormones interact with the hippocampus to enhance memory consolidation. In essence, your brain decides, this mattered, don't forget it. But this comes with a twist. While emotional memories are often stronger, they're not always more accurate. In fact, intense emotion can lead to distorted memories. You might remember the general feeling of an event with absolute clarity but misremember key details. What someone wore, what was said, who was there. Emotion enhances the sense of vividness, but it doesn't guarantee factual precision. That's because the brain prioritizes salience over exactness. It wants to remember the impact, not necessarily the spreadsheet of events. This can lead to some fascinating phenomena. People might argue over shared memories, each one convinced their version is true. You said this. No, I didn't. Often both people are drawing from emotionally charged memories shaped by their individual experiences. The memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And emotion is one of its most powerful sculptors. Interestingly, different emotions influence memory in different ways. Fear, for example, can sharpen the memory of specific details, like the face of someone threatening or the layout of an environment where danger occurred. This has obvious evolutionary advantages. If you almost get trampled by a stampede, it's helpful to remember exactly where the danger came from. Sadness, on the other hand, tends to promote analytical and detailed memory processing. When you're sad, your brain slows down and zooms in. This may explain why people sometimes ruminate, revisiting events over and over in an attempt to understand them. While this can deepen insight, it can also reinforce emotional pain if done excessively. Then there's joy, which tends to promote a more global memory style. Rather than fixating on details, joyful memories often come in waves. Feelings, impressions, a golden haze. You might not recall the specifics of your favourite birthday party, but you remember the warmth, the laughter, the sense of being cared for. Joy encourages a big picture view. And what about nostalgia, that bittersweet blend of longing and sweetness, often triggered by music, smells, or old photos? Neuroscience suggests that nostalgia involves both the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, along with the brain's reward system. It's a hybrid emotion, part memory, part meaning-making. It helps us feel connected to our past selves, offering continuity and comfort. That's why nostalgic memories often surface during times of stress or transition. They're your brain's way of grounding you, reminding you who you've been and what you've loved. Of course, not all emotional memories are welcome. Trauma creates memories that are often intrusive, persistent, and difficult to integrate. In traumatic memory, the amygdala goes into overdrive, while the hippocampus may partially shut down. This can lead to fragmented or poorly contextualized memories, images, sounds, or bodily sensations that resurface without a clear narrative. In PTSD, these emotional fragments can return involuntarily, triggered by cues that the person might not even be consciously aware of. A smell, a sound, or a phrase can open the floodgates. because the memory wasn't fully processed at the time, it remains vivid and raw, as if it just happened. Therapy approaches like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and trauma-focused CBT aim to help people reprocess and recontextualize these memories, allowing the brain to file them in a more manageable way. Memory and emotion also influence each other in the present. The mood you're in now can bias the memories you recall. This is called mood-congruent memory. When you're feeling low, you're more likely to remember past disappointments. When you're feeling cheerful, you recall happy moments more easily. Your emotional state acts like a filter, colouring the memories that come to mind. This can be a bit of a trap during low moods. Your brain retrieves negative memories which reinforce your current feelings, which then retrieve more negative memories. But the reverse is also true. Shifting your focus, even briefly, toward positive memories can help lighten your mood and create an upward spiral. So what can we do with all this information? If memory is shaped by emotion, and emotions are shaped by experience, then it makes sense to tend carefully to the stories we tell ourselves. Not to rewrite the past, but to remember it with kindness, balance, and context. You can't control what happens, but you can choose how you revisit it. Practices like journaling, storytelling, and even photography can help consolidate positive emotional memories. When you write about a meaningful moment, your brain re-engages with the experience, strengthening the neural pathways that support it. When you tell someone a happy story, you're reinforcing not just the facts, but the feelings. And when you look at a photograph that brings you joy, you're not just remembering the scene, you're reactivating the neural pattern of that emotion. There's also great value in creating new emotional memories. Moments that don't need to be spectacular, just meaningful. A walk with a friend, a quiet afternoon with a book, cooking a favourite meal. These everyday pleasures, when savoured and repeated, become the raw material of well-being. They may not be flashbulb moments, but over time they form a tapestry of calm and contentment. Because in the end, your emotional memory is not just a personal archive, it's your inner autobiography. It shapes how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you imagine your future. And while you can't control every chapter, you can become an active editor. You can choose to revisit kindness, reframe pain, and return again and again to what makes life feel meaningful. Your brain, ever loyal, will remember. If emotions are storms, then emotional regulation is your umbrella, raincoat, and weather radar all in one. It's what helps you ride out the downpour without getting drenched, or at least without yelling at a stranger just because you missed your bus. Emotional regulation isn't about suppressing or avoiding feelings, it's about managing them wisely, so you can respond to life with intention, not just reaction. The human brain is wired to feel deeply, but also to regulate those feelings. This balancing act is one of the great marvels of the mind. It allows us to feel grief without collapsing, anger without harming, and joy without becoming reckless. So let's dive into how the brain learns to breathe through its emotions, what parts are involved, how it develops, and how we can get better at it with practice. At the center of emotional regulation is the prefrontal cortex, specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These areas are responsible for planning, decision-making, impulse control, and perspective-taking. In emotional situations, they act like internal moderators, checking in with other regions, like the amygdala, insular, and anterior cingulate cortex, and deciding whether to pump the brakes or give the green light. When your amygdala flares up in response to a perceived threat, say your boss sends you an email that just says we need to talk, your prefrontal cortex steps in. It assesses context, evaluates evidence, and helps determine whether this is a real emergency or just your brain catastrophizing. If it's functioning well, it soothes the amygdala's fire and helps you respond more thoughtfully, rather than sending a panicked reply or mentally packing your desk. This process isn't instantaneous, and it doesn't always work smoothly, especially in moments of high stress, fatigue, or trauma. Emotional regulation is a skill, not a switch, and like any skill, it develops over time. In fact, children's brains are still learning how to regulate emotions well into adolescence and even early adulthood. That's because the prefrontal cortex is one of the last regions to fully mature, not reaching full development until around age 25. This is why toddlers have meltdowns over broken crackers, and teenagers sometimes respond to mild criticism as if it were the apocalypse. Their emotional brains are in high gear, but the regulation systems are still under construction. As we grow, we hopefully learn strategies to manage emotions more effectively. Psychologists group these strategies into two broad categories: antecedent-focused and response-focused. Antecedent-focused strategies happen before the emotion fully kicks in. These include situation selection, choosing environments or interactions that are less likely to trigger distress. Example, avoiding the cousin who always starts political debates at dinner. Situation modification, changing aspects of a situation to make it more manageable. Opening a window during a tense conversation, turning on soothing music before a stressful task. Attentional deployment, shifting your focus away from distressing stimuli, looking out the window instead of at your phone while waiting for medical results. Cognitive reappraisal, reframing the way you interpret a situation. This is one of the most powerful tools we have for regulating emotion. Cognitive reappraisal deserves a special spotlight. It's your brain's way of telling a different story, one that changes how you feel without denying what happened. For example, instead of thinking, "That person ignored me because they hate me," you might reframe it as, "They seem distracted. Maybe they're having a tough day." This shift doesn't erase your feelings, but it can soften them, reduce distress, and help you stay grounded. Neuroscience backs this up. When people use reappraisal strategies, their prefrontal cortex becomes more active and their amygdala activity decreases. It's like watching your brain talk itself down from the ledge. Response-focused strategies, on the other hand, happen after the emotion has already arrived. These include suppression, trying to hide or inhibit emotional expression, smiling through gritted teeth. Distraction, temporarily shifting focus to something unrelated, watching a funny video after a stressful day. Relaxation techniques, using breath, body, or movement to calm the nervous system. Deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, or gentle yoga. Suppression is a tricky one. It might help in the short term, say staying composed during a public presentation, but over time, chronic suppression can take a toll. It increases physiological stress, reduces memory for emotional experiences, and can lead to emotional numbing. The brain doesn't just mute the bad stuff, it mutes the good stuff too. That's why acceptance-based strategies are gaining traction in psychology. Approaches like mindfulness and acceptance and commitment therapy encourage you to observe your emotions without judgment. You don't have to like what you're feeling. You just have to notice it and allow it to be there, like watching clouds drift by. This stance of gentle curiosity can help reduce reactivity and open up space for more flexible responses. Another key ingredient in emotional regulation is interoception, your ability to sense internal bodily states. The insula, as we explored earlier, helps you track things like heartbeat, breath, tension, or that odd flutter in your stomach. People with strong interoceptive awareness often regulate emotions more effectively because they can detect subtle shifts and respond early, before the emotion becomes overwhelming. For example, if you notice your shoulders tightening and your breath shortening, you might realize, I'm getting anxious. That awareness gives you the chance to step back, breathe, and recalibrate. Without it, you might only realize you're anxious after you've stormed out of a meeting or eaten a loaf of bread. Social factors play a huge role too. Emotional regulation isn't just an internal process, it's deeply relational. We learn how to manage feelings through interactions with caregivers, peers, and communities. This is known as co-regulation. A parent soothing a crying child, a friend holding space during heartbreak, a partner calming you down with a steady voice, all of these shape how your brain learns to self-soothe later on. Even as adults, we regulate better with others. A text from someone you trust, a hug, a shared laugh. These aren't just emotional comforts. They're neurological recalibrations. Human brains are social, and we're not meant to do all this regulating alone. Over time, with awareness and practice, emotional regulation can become more natural. But it's never perfect, and it's not meant to be. Emotions are supposed to be felt. The goal isn't to eliminate them or control them like a robot. The goal is to develop enough skill, insight, and compassion that we can ride the waves without drowning. Some days that means using your breath to stay calm during a difficult conversation. Other days it means watching a sad movie and having a good cry. Emotional regulation isn't about always being calm, it's about knowing when to step back, when to lean in, and when to ask for help. And the more we understand how our brain handles emotion, the more we can support it, through sleep, movement, connection, reflection, and kindness. So the next time you feel your emotions rising, whether it's irritation, grief, joy, or something unnamed, pause for a moment. Notice the signals. Take a breath. You don't need to fix it, just listen. Your brain is not misbehaving, it's doing its job, processing, adapting, protecting, learning, and with a little help from your prefrontal cortex and a lot of patience, you're learning too. Emotional regulation isn't about bottling the storm, it's about learning to sail. Emotions are often thought of as private affairs, internal storms or sunrises that happen quietly behind our eyes. But in truth, they are anything but solitary. Emotions are social. We catch them from one another like colds. We read them in faces before a single word is spoken. We feel them shift in a room, even without knowing why. At every level, from biology to behavior, our emotions are wired into our relationships. This is the story of the social brain and how we feel together. To understand how emotions operate socially, let's begin with one of the most fascinating discoveries in neuroscience: mirror neurons. Found in the premotor cortex and other parts of the brain, mirror neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that same action. That means watching someone smile activates, in a small way, the parts of your brain involved in smiling. If you see someone stub their toe and wince, your brain winces too. You feel a trace of their pain in your own body. These neurons are thought to be part of the neurological basis for empathy, our ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Empathy isn't just a virtue, it's a system, deeply embedded in the human brain. It allows us to live in families, tribes, and societies. It helps us predict behavior, comfort loved ones, cooperate in groups, and build trust. Without empathy, we'd be brilliant but isolated, thinking machines without true connection. Empathy comes in two main forms: affective empathy, which is feeling what someone else feels, and cognitive empathy, which is understanding what someone else feels. The first is more emotional and automatic, often involving the amygdala and insula. The second is more deliberate and involves the prefrontal cortex and areas linked to theory of mind, our ability to imagine the inner worlds of others. This capacity to read other minds is one of the reasons humans are so socially adept. We don't just react to what people say, we react to how they seem. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a subtle shift in posture. Our brains pick up these cues constantly. The fusiform face area in the temporal lobe specializes in recognizing faces, and it can detect micro-expressions in milliseconds. That's why someone can tell you they're fine, but your gut knows better. And it's not just facial expressions. Emotional signals travel through tone of voice, body language, and even smell. Subtle chemical signals called chemosignals, yes, emotional pheromones, can be detected by others. Research shows that people can smell fear or stress in sweat samples, and that these chemosignals can influence the emotions of the person who detects them. Your brain, it turns out, is an emotional sponge, soaking up cues from others and adjusting your state accordingly. This emotional echo is called emotional contagion, and it's everywhere. Spend time with someone who's anxious, and you might start feeling tense yourself. Sit near a laughing group, and even if you don't get the joke, you may find yourself smiling. Emotions ripple through groups like sound waves, subtle, invisible, powerful. In workplaces, schools, families, and even public transportation, the moods of those around us shape our own. This effect is even stronger in close relationships. In couples, emotional states can become synchronized. If one partner is anxious or irritable, the other often begins to feel the same way, not necessarily because they share the same concern, but because their nervous systems are attuned to each other. The same is true for parents and children. A stressed parent can pass that tension to their child without a word being spoken. Conversely, a calm caregiver can help regulate a child's emotions simply through tone, touch, and presence. This process is called co-regulation, and it begins early. Babies can't regulate their emotions on their own. They cry, flail, fuss, and rely on adults to soothe them. Over time, through thousands of comforting interactions, a child's brain builds its own regulation skills. But even as adults, we still benefit from co-regulation. That's why a hug from the right person can lower your heart rate, or why hearing a friend's voice can make you breathe easier. Emotion is not just felt, it's transferred. That's why leaders can lift or sink the emotional tone of a room, why a smile from a stranger can change your whole day. Why music, with its rhythms and crescendos, can unite a crowd of strangers into a single pulsing wave of feeling. Even shared experiences amplify emotion. Watching a movie in a crowded theatre often feels more intense than watching it alone. Cheering at a concert, mourning at a funeral, celebrating the win. These are not just emotional moments, but emotional synchronizations. Your brain aligns with others, a process known as neural entrainment, where people's brainwaves and physiological states sync up during shared activities. Language also plays a crucial role in social emotion. We don't just feel, we tell each other what we feel, and in doing so, we shape one another's emotional landscapes. When you express your frustration, relief, excitement, or grief, you're inviting someone else into your experience. That act of sharing helps make sense of emotion, and it builds intimacy. Emotional vocabulary gives form to our inner world, allowing us to navigate it together. That's why cultures vary not just in how they express emotion, but in which emotions are emphasized. Some cultures value emotional restraint, others celebrate open expression. Some languages have emotional words that don't exist in English, like the Portuguese word saudade, which captures a deep nostalgic longing, or the Japanese amae, which describes the comfort of being dependent on someone's love. These cultural frameworks shape not only how we express emotions, but how we experience them. In collectivist cultures, for instance, emotions are often evaluated in terms of how they affect the group. In individualistic cultures, the focus might be more on personal authenticity. Your emotional life is not just personal, it's social, linguistic, and cultural. There's also a darker side to social emotion: shame, guilt, embarrassment, and envy. Emotions that exist largely because we care how others see us. These are deeply social signals. Shame tells us we've violated a group norm. Guilt says we've harmed someone else. Embarrassment smooths over minor social mistakes. Envy arises when we compare ourselves to others and come up lacking. These emotions may be uncomfortable, but they help maintain social order. They encourage accountability, empathy, and reflection. On the brighter side, pride, gratitude, and compassion are also inherently social. Pride arises when we're seen doing well. Gratitude binds us to those who support us. Compassion motivates us to ease others' pain. These emotions remind us that we are interconnected, that our well-being is linked with the well-being of others. So what does all this mean in everyday life? It means that your emotional state doesn't belong to you alone. It's part of a larger network. Your relationships, your community, your culture. The way you accept, manage, and share your feelings affects others, and their emotional worlds shape you in return. It also means that cultivating emotional awareness isn't just about self-help, it's about relational health. When you understand your own emotions, you're better able to respond to others with sensitivity and insight. You become a better friend, partner, parent, colleague, and when you learn to tune into the emotional signals of others, when you listen not just to their words but to their tone, expression, and posture, you start to see the hidden conversations beneath the surface. The ones that really matter. In a world that often feels divided and distracted, emotion is a kind of universal language, a pulse that connects us. Beneath the noise of opinion and identity, there's a shared architecture, a brain that feels, mirrors, resonates. So the next time someone laughs, cries, sighs, or glows in your presence, remember, your brain is listening, it's responding. It's reaching across the gap to say, I see you, I feel that too. And in that moment, without needing permission or translation, we become beautifully, unmistakably human, together.
And so our gentle journey through the emotional brain comes to a close. We've wandered past the amygdala sparking fear, the reward pathways painting joy, and the quiet networks that weave memory into love, loss, and meaning. What feels so intangible, laughter, sorrow, even the simple calm you may feel now, is rooted in a beautiful dance of neurons and chemistry, shaping the story of who you are. If you're still awake with me, I'd love to hear what emotion feels most mysterious to you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've already drifted off, somewhere between dopamine and daydreams, then perhaps your brain is still at work, quietly stitching tonight's story into the fabric of your dreams. If this exploration helped you unwind, please tap like and subscribe. It helps sleep theory grow and reach more dreamers looking for rest and gentle wonder. Until next time, may your mind be calm, your emotions light, and your night filled with peace. Good night.